I'm Jan English-Lueck, and this mini lecture supports the reading that you're doing by Whitehead on community-based interventions, definitions, and types. The author, a longtime ethnographer of organizations, makes several distinctions that I think are important to think about. First, many organizations use the word community, but they use it in different ways. It refers to different groups of people, and it refers to different relationships with those people. So when we talk about community-based organizations, it's important to ask the first question: what community are they talking about? And what is the relationship of that community to the organization? And to that end, Whitehead had looked at a number of different organizations and developed a typology, a set of relationships that defines different kinds of organizations. Some of those organizations are grassroots organizations where there's a heavy local commitment and the community is deeply involved in the organization. In other kinds of organizations, the organizations seek to serve communities, but they're based on formal expertise, external funding, they're based on a much more obvious hierarchical organization. And often those two components, the local community and the formal organization, interact with each other, but they do so in somewhat different ways. Whitehead has created 7 different types, which he translates into Roman numerals, and I have added Arabic numerals to make it a little simpler to remember. But they all have to do with the proportion of local and external agency in shaping the direction and the activities of the organization. Starting with type 1, all local, both the organizers and the beneficiaries are local, and there's no connection to any external support. All the way to the other end, where there are programs that are in type 5, for example, where the change agencies target communities, they serve the communities, but they themselves are not involved in the communities. And in type 6, you see that they may be involving local communities, they may be advising them, but there isn't a true partnership. It isn't until type 7 that we start to get that true partnership of external funders, external experts, and their connections into the local community are equitable. And so you see the main distinction between these types is in the balance of power between organizations that are locally driven and organizations that are externally driven. And you might think of a locally driven organization as something that popped up natively. And in many ways, Japantown Prepared is an example of a locally driven organization. And then you have organizations like the Red Cross, which are filled with experts. They're a global, very complex, non-governmental organization that is connected to different countries, different faith communities, different local organizations, and they collect money in a very different way than a local organization would do so, and they have accountability because they are a large external organization in ways that local organizations are not accountable in exactly the same way. And I don't want you to fall into the error of thinking community organizations, locally driven organizations, good, expert organizations, bad. It isn't that simple. There's a different formula of the balance of power in each of those different 7 types. And they all have positive and negative things associated with them. Community organizations are wonderful in providing sustainable support and resiliency within a community. And any activity that is taken diffuses through the community very effectively. Local organizations bring incredible cultural sensitivity and they enhance democratic interactions. But at the same time, they often don't have very much funding or even the ability to ask for funding. You have to have a certain kind of expertise to approach funding agencies to say, here's what we plan to do, give us money. And if they lack that, they're going to lack that funding. And local community organizations can be factionalized. We say community, but are they representing the entirety of the community? Is there one stakeholder within the community that is overrepresented? And in which case, the local organization in dominating that particular organization is actually reducing access to other parts of the community. Think of it even in the obvious way of the different kinds of languages that are available to speak in a community. So if you have primarily English speaking organizers, then that's going to limit the capacity of Tagalog or Spanish speaking community members to participate. And so this brings us to a very important sociological and anthropological point. Networks are very important in connecting to other people and gaining outsider access. But strong networks which overemphasize the core community, can actually reduce outsider access. And you have a different set of problems with externally driven organizations filled with experts and hierarchies and often very powerful associations with universities and governments and perhaps even for-profit organizations. They have the expertise to develop strong conceptual strength. They can understand, for example, what a disaster is and how to respond to it. They can construct rigorous approaches methodologically that are highly defensible and highly replicatable in different communities. They're extremely efficient. They have a lot of experience and can efficiently use resources, but they aren't necessarily connected to the communities that they're serving, and they may introduce a cultural gap between the local community and those outside experts. And that limits the amount of buy-in or trust that the community experiences. So as you are reading the history of the relationship between Japantown Prepared and San Jose State, reflect on Whitehead's typology and think about how that relationship has changed over the years. It is definitely a deeply local organization that has reached out to San Jose State in order to leverage the power of the experts both in the faculty and among the students. And so that relationship is trying to work towards that equitable sweet spot that is right at the center of the fulcrum. And so think about that as you characterize the way Japantown Prepared functions as an organization, and think about the kinds of questions you can ask over the course of this semester that'll help you understand the complex ways in which local organizations interact with other facets, with other organizations such as our cities, disaster preparedness entities, other entities such as the fire department, the police department, as well as the many organizations that are embedded within Japantown, including those faith-based organizations associated with the temple and with the Wesley Methodist Church, and the other kinds of organizations such as the Filipino Community Organization, as well as renters and homeowners organizations.